Beneath the reinforced observation deck of Orbital Station Aegis, a Class 10 gravity well gnawed at the hull. Planet C, R889. We called it the Crusher. For 90 orbital cycles, a coalition of 22 species had tried to chart its tectonic plates. We had mapped less than 4% of the surface. We had lost 40% of our personnel to 3.5G atmospheric crush, corrosive vapor storms, and crustal snaps that could shatter a dreadnought's spine. My name is Val. As the Solvan Logistics Coordinator, my job was managing the casualty reports. When the administration assigned us a human intern, I assumed it was a bureaucratic error. When they told me her deployment was an acceptable loss to appease the budget committee, my secondary heart seized. Ren stood in the airlock, whistling. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, built with a dense, terrestrial symmetry. She wore a patched hazard suit, the faded peeling Earth-Survey course. Logo on her shoulder carried the faint, incongruous smell of ozone and cafeteria coffee in a staging bay sterile enough for surgery. Carabiners clinked at her hip. In her hands she held a folded square of fibrous material, a napkin from the mess hall, and a wooden writing implement. "Nice planet," she said, adjusting a strap. "Reminds me of home, actually. A bit light on the gravity." I checked her biological readouts, trying to understand how her skeletal structure hadn't already collapsed. What happened next down on that surface, I wish I could say it made us understand humans better. Stay close. The deployment pod hit the surface. We watched the telemetry feeds from the orbital command center, waiting for her biometric signals to flatline. Instead, the pod doors opened. Ren stepped out into a gravity field that weighed 3.5 times what standard galactic physiology could endure. My Solvan gravity sense organs thrummed, tracking her mass. Our sensors rely on gravitational displacement to measure physical presence. As she warped, her mass readings fluctuated wildly. She wasn't just resisting the pull. She was using a kinetic momentum transfer she called a rolling rest, shifting her center of gravity with every step to let the planet's own force pull her forward into the next stride. To our instruments, she looked like a localized gravitational anomaly. Then the vapor storm rolled in. A cloud of caustic aerosol swept across the jagged basalt plains. I leaned over the console, watching the medical team ready the retrieval drone. The atmospheric sensors flashed crimson, meaning her lungs should have been actively liquefying. But no, she was whistling. A sharp, off-key tune. Through the audio feed, she coughed twice. "Bit of a mild irritant today," she muttered. She reached up and actively unsealed her helmet collar, exposing her neck to the rushing air to cool down. The chief medical officer's gill slits flared, locking wide in pure physiological distress. He dropped his data stylus. It clattered against the metal deck. Ren just kept walking. She paused every few hundred meters, pulling out that wrinkled cafeteria napkin. She would stare at the violent, shifting landscape, make a quick mark with her wooden pencil, and fold it back into her pocket. A low hum. The command center deck vibrated. It was a preliminary warning of a crustal snap. A 3.5G tectonic tremor ripped through the valley she was traversing. The ground beneath her boots fractured, rising in a jagged wave of rock. I reached for the emergency beacon, certain her marrow was about to be compressed to dust. Ren didn't brace. She dropped low, bending her knees, and let the shockwave carry her upward. She surfed the kinetic displacement, landing perfectly balanced on a newly formed ridge. And she didn't just survive it. She used the newly elevated vantage point to pull out the napkin again. The Solvan sensor array, specifically Terminal SS38, began throwing calibration errors. My monitor blinked a steady yellow warning. The system was trying to categorize her structural integrity and failing. A standard synthetic exoskeleton would have buckled under the sheer force of that tremor. Ren merely stretched her shoulders, her joints popping audibly over the comms. "Good vantage point," she murmured to herself. Beside me, the survey chief leaned closer to the glass. His mandibles were perfectly still, an involuntary biological response to severe cognitive dissonance. We had spent decades sending armored drones and biologically enhanced pathfinders into that valley. None had returned from a crustal snap. "Coordinator Vale," the chief whispered, not taking his eyes off the feed. "Is her suit running a dampening field?" "Negative, Chief," I replied, double-checking the readouts. "The suit is standard environmental wear. It has patches held together by synthetic resin. Her structural integrity is entirely biological. At the 2-hour mark, She reached a depression where the gravitational pull spiked to 4.2 G. This was the graveyard of Pathfinder Team 7. We expected her to round it. Instead, she slid down the embankment, unclipped a metal canteen from one of her carabiners, and found a pooled condensation seep. Hydration break, her voice crackled over the speakers. She drank the unfiltered water. I documented her progress, my hands moving mechanically over the interface. The emotional shift in the room was palpable. We had started the morning expecting to record a casualty. Now we were watching a lone biped treat a corrosive high-gravity zone like a nature preserve. We were waiting for the planet to fight back. We were waiting for the inevitable moment where her luck ran out. At the 6-hour mark, Ren stopped. She looked at her wrist, tapping a mechanical timepiece with a cracked face. Then she simply turned around and began the long hike back to the extraction pod. The journey back took another hour. I tracked her biometric data the entire time, watching the monitors with a mixture of disbelief and profound exhaustion. Her heart rate remained stable. Her core temperature fluctuated by barely a fraction of a degree. When the pod doors finally closed, sealing out the crushing 3.5 G environment, the silence in the command center was absolute. We watched the green lights on the airlock status panel illuminate one by one. The atmospheric scrubbers cycled, clearing the corrosive vapor from the pod. The collective exhale of 22 species sounded like a massive pressure valve releasing. We had done it. We had successfully supervised a human through a Class 10 gravity well without a single biological failure. The medical officer let out a long, ragged breath, slumping forward in his restraint harness. His gill slits fluttered in sheer exhaustion, though he hadn't taken a single step on the surface. I saved my incident logs, closing out the casualty report template I had opened earlier. The tension in the room evaporated into a heavy, warm relief. The air felt lighter. We had survived the assignment. The pod docked. Ren stepped out of the decontamination chamber. She looked tired, rubbing the back of her neck with one hand, but she was otherwise entirely intact. Her breathing was steady. She reached into one of the many pockets of her patched suit. "Got the survey done," she said. She tossed the flimsy, wrinkled cafeteria napkin itself onto the main console. It still had a faint water ring from a mug staining the corner. "What's next?" she asked. We offered polite, patronizing smiles. She had survived. That was an incredible statistical anomaly, and we were perfectly content to let her believe her little drawing was a real contribution to the mission. Then the cartography drone's laser automatically swept over the object on the console. The system pinged. A second later, it chimed. Then the entire central holodeble lit up with a blinding golden confirmation matrix. The chief's mandibles parted, a prelude to ordering a diagnostic sweep of a malfunctioning scanner before the overlay matched, contour for contour. The room went completely still. It wasn't a sketch. It was a predictive geological survey. We overlaid her pencil marks with our 90-year database. The alignment was 99.997% accurate. She hadn't just observed the landscape. She had calculated the planetary stresses intuitively. When she dropped low to surf that tectonic tremor, she was measuring the deceleration arc. When she stopped for a hydration break in the depression, she was confirming the gravitational density of the bedrock. She had mapped the fault lines by feeling the kinetic energy travel through her own bones. We scrambled to pull terrestrial data from the archive, trying to comprehend what we were looking at. The files explained it all. Humans possess 180-degree forearm rotation, giving them mechanical climbing advantages no synthetic drone could replicate. They synthesize vital biological nutrients directly from raw stellar radiation. They build their densest population centers directly inside the blast radii of 1,500 active volcanoes. To her, CR 889 wasn't a death trap. It was just a rocky hike. The survey chief's gravity sense organs began to vibrate rapidly. It was a high-frequency thrum, the specific biological harmonic associated with imminent structural failure. It wasn't the planet failing, it was our fundamental understanding of biology. Our worldview was shattering. She had done in 6 hours what took a coalition of 22 advanced species almost a century to fail at, navigating a landscape that should have liquefied her internal organs, and her only reported physiological cost was a mild fatigue that she fully intended to cure with a second cup of terrible cafeteria coffee. We realized we had spent 90 years trying to force our technology onto the planet, fighting its gravity. She showed us how to listen to it instead. We provided the orbital mechanics, and in return, the intern taught us how to survive the ground. The administration rewrote the contact handbook the following morning. Class 10 planets were immediately reclassified under a new operational directive. Human solo survey only. Behind reinforced glass, the new Galactic standard for tectonic cartography rested inside an archival preservation stasis field. A flimsy cafeteria napkin, stained with coffee and marked in wood graphite, holding the exact shape of a world that could not break her.